Shifting gears, you have predicted in your books, you have predicted for decades that the private Federal Reserve would ruin the currency and debase it even faster. Obviously, it had lost 99 cents by now, and a lot of that value since 1913, since we got the private Federal Reserve. A lot of that loss has happened just the last few years. We're seeing an acceleration. Now even mainline economists and analysts are mirroring your a breakdown dealing with the end of the dollar. Now we see China's yuan exploding. We now see countries from South Korea to Russia moving away from the dollar. Saudi Arabia is starting to move away. It looks like that big event you've been warning about is getting closer and closer. Can you speak to collapse and what's going to happen if the dollar does devalue, sir?
Well, you're certainly right. It's getting much, much closer, and it's not just a few third-world countries or, in the past, you've reported on it before, when Iran and Iraq would do it, then they'd get punished. Oh, you can't give up on the dollar, don't take on the dollar. But now it's people like, the Germans aren't all that happy with us. And I saw today that the French are pretty annoyed with us, too, about, how we handle our monetary policy and how we treat the people, with spying on them and all the rest. But this whole episode of with Russia right now over Ukraine is probably the stupidest policy conceivable, that we want to provoke a war with Russia, put on sanctions, and then they're not going to take that. And then all of a sudden, oh, you mean they can make an alliance with China and India? And they are. It probably takes a little while to do that, but that's what the plan is, and I think the numbers are coming together. I think Brazil wants to be involved with that, and it's a growing effort, because I think there's a built-up hostility with America, because we've been bullying the world, but nobody's been strong enough to take us on, especially since the breakdown of the Soviet system, that we have been the kingpin. So economically and militarily, nobody can say boo. But once they see that our economy is in trouble and they have a chance to do something, they get sick and tired of these sanctions that are put on countries, because we tell them, nope, you can't talk, you can't trade with Russia, you can't do this. Well, I think when we start to slip as we are, I think there's going to be piling on. I think the piling on has already occurred, which means that we're closer to that point where there may be a precipitous fall. You make the right points. The Fed has orchestrated about a 98, 99% devaluation already, but it's still a dollar is a dollar today. What if you lose the rest of it, and 100% or a large portion of what we have left? That's a big deal. And if you look at all the currency destructions around the world, the end stages go very rapidly. Most people remember now about Zimbabwe dollar, but they only remember the 2 or 3 months that it was in the news. But they had been doing that for a lot of years, and then confidence is lost. There's still enough confidence in the dollar that tomorrow you're not going to read where everybody dumped the dollar. But I think there's central banks now buying up gold. Russia mines it and they keep it. China buys the gold. India's always bought gold, and a lot of other people do. But our banks, the Western banks, the European banks, and of course the United States claim that there's no need for that. We're not going to buy it. But who knows what they're doing behind the scenes? I suspect that they're doing the same thing.
That's right. Zimbabwe went in just the space of a year, about 5 years ago, and it's still bad, from inflation where it took 1 million of their currencies to buy a loaf of bread to $1 trillion. We just showed some of those $1 trillion notes on screen, and their answer was total totalitarianism. And as a historian, as a medical doctor, as a von Mises Institute fellow, I know that you've studied history, but undoubtedly the establishment's rabbit out of a hat is the armored vehicles, the checkpoints, the NSA surveillance. They think authoritarianism is going to hold this together, and their nukes are going to menace the rest of the world. But then our own elite hate America, the old America, the ideas of liberty. They share that with the rest of the world that dislikes our imperiousness. So it's a very bizarre mix of factors where the establishment's trying to shut off our power plants, Cloward and Piven, our governmental systems bankrupting them in a power grab. But I sit back looking at the wide spectrum, and I see the elite undermining their own empire that gave them their power. So it really seems like a evil system that doesn't even know what it's doing, or does it? Can they pull a rabbit out of the hat, Dr. Ron Paul?
No, temporarily they will, but they think they are omnipotent because they get away with it for so long. But eventually, you know, the markets and the people catch up with them. You know, just yesterday, I don't know if you noticed, there was a hearing in the Banking Financial Services Committee about auditing the Fed. Of course, they wouldn't use my bill to audit, and they bring up with this crazy scheme that they can do it by a formula. And as long as the Fed follows this formula, which is just another form of economic planning, and they did this because the Fed's 100 years old, and they said, now it's time for reform, but they were pretending this was audit, had nothing to do with audit, although they used that language. I sent in my, my dissenting views, and they did take them, and they put them in the record, but they really didn't give it a serious discussion. And the big thing is the Paul Brown, congressman has the bill that I had for a long time. He has 224 co-sponsors, enough to pass the bill, and they wouldn't even bring that bill up and contemplate it. They bring up this other crazy thing of a price rule.
A lot of economists say that it isn't that the Fed doesn't have a policy, they just lie to Congress and the public about what their policy is, and that they're already involved in a controlled collapse right now. And most economists I interview, a lot of them prestigious, say we've really been in a depression since 2008 in most sectors. Dr. Paul, you've given us a pretty accurate prognosis going back decades ago. What do you think our current real economic state is?
Well, I think it's in total shambles, and of course they sort of downplayed that when I said in 08 during the 08 campaign that we were already starting in a recession. Of course, the Republicans were in charge, so that was a really bad thing to say. No, I think certainly for the lower half of our economy, of our people, you know, the middle class and down, they're in a depression. You know, their standard of living isn't going up, and real income hasn't gone up since the Bretton Woods broke down. Since we went totally off the gold standard, real wages have not going up. Nominal wages do, but real wealth accumulation, you know, goes to the wealthy class deal in Wall Street. And even the Fed, they haven't been shy about saying, well, we are going to interfere. We have a plunge protection team. We have to go in there and protect the markets. Well, all this monetary inflation has gone to the markets. But I think ultimately, and I think that's what you're suggesting, will they be able to protect themselves? A few maybe, but there's going to be a lot who have benefited by this. They won't know when to get out either, and it looks very, very shaky right now. I do not believe, you know, now they're saying, well, no more quantitative easing, and we're going to quit by October. Well, they don't have the biggest idea what conditions will be like in October, but they claim they're going to quit quantitative easing, but they're not going to allow interest rates to go up. Well, that means they're going to print money anyway, and they'll buy something else. It's just that they're not going to buy any more long-term bonds. So
and then
they're always in the business of deceiving us.
Exactly, and then that inflates the stock market. That's where the inflation's going, and people think it's really super valued, but it's not. It's actually just bought and devalued dollars. A very dangerous game indeed. You know, talking to you, who's obviously a very wise man, who's been a Air Force, a medical air corpsman, medical doctor, Congress, author, the whole nine yards. You're a smart guy. And if I was sitting there with you on the fishing dock, just between me, you, and the fence post, and I said, Dr. Paul, where do you really think America and the world's going in your gut? In 120 seconds, let's say if you were talking to your grandson and you were giving them advice, really giving them the skinny, what does your gut tell you is going to happen long-term to civilization?
Well, long-term, I'm not as pessimistic as I am short-term. There's no way that the Congress, a president, or a few more members of Congress are in the Senate will all of a sudden be able to reverse this because the momentum is so strong, the debt is so big that, the debt has to be liquidated. The only question how you liquidate debt is you don't pay it, which isn't the case for a country like ours. They always pay it, but they pay it with paper money and devalue the currency. So we're locked in. It's not going to change. We're not going to all of a sudden, let's not go into quite so many wars. Let's wean ourselves off of the welfare state and the warfare state, and let's gradually go back to the gold standard. It's not going to happen. Where I believe is we're quite capable in 5, 10, 20 years from now of having a group of people who have been influenced by everything from radio shows to the internet on Austrian economics, because there's been a tremendous amount of excitement and understanding of the Federal Reserve in the last 5 years. So since ideas do have consequences, it's worked in the past, so I'm holding out with a tinge of hope and conviction that if we keep fighting the battle of ideas, that we will then influence enough people that they will only endorse a government that presents a case of freedom for the individual, get out of these wars, sound money, and maybe paying a lot more attention to the Constitution.
RonPaulChannel.com.